discussed all of and close all tabs to make sure that we are at the very beginning. Can you see my screen? I hope so. If you have any problems, just let me know. So in the first folder, PO1 introduction, you can find three projects: dependency injection application, introduction, and introduction unit test. It is similar content related to the kind of the projects as we have during the laboratory. In laboratory, we have tested, we have used program that also has 3 projects, but here it is more complicated. There is more details because it covers more things, not only the dependency injection, but dependency injection is very important. But let me recall the definition of the unit test. During the laboratory, we defined the unit test we can use to define unit tests. We are using 3 descriptions. 3 descriptions are not equal to each other, but still we can use this first. We are using unit test to test to make sure that the program behaves as expected. Behaves. It is a very important word. Second, it's a definition that we are getting from the functionality implemented in the program correct results as expected. Results as expected, we proved during the laboratory that we can expect results. To expect the results, we have 2 options. One is to provide well-known data, testing data, and I expect that during task one, you will it is the most useful approach for you to use stable testing data. In this case, you can expect from your program results and provide unit tests against this expectation. And third definition was that actually unit test nothing else like only if the unit test method don't return exception. So there is no exception is not thrown in the unit test. Let's on the left you can see that there is a lot of tests, but I call all of them unblock. So it'll takes a while to make sure that we are starting a good point, that the software is correct against test we have. Remember that there could be problems with the code, there could be problem with test, and that could be problem with coverage of the testing. So the tests don't cover all the aspects, all the functionality provided by your software. But we finished the laboratory discussing the user interface, console application. Here you have an example. You have an example of the user interface. It's console application, and in this console application, there is a class constructor injection. Let's open it. Pick definition. You can see that there is just a few methods, and in all of the methods, you are tracing information that the method, to make sure that the method have been called, have been executed. Now I'm trying to apply the first definition. Unit test is testing the program against our expectation, testing behavior of the program. So now I'm trying to prove that all the methods have been called in this very simple example. So after calling this application, this console application, so we should get user interface on the screen. After calling this application, we can see that on the screen we are getting messages saying that the method was called, and there is something like identifier, there is message, something like message. Message contains information that appropriate method has been entered. So there is entering alpha, bravo, Charlie, and delta. There are four methods. It is the first way typically you are using to test your application and testing your expectation. So you are using your application and testing the reaction, testing the interaction with the application, and from this interaction, you try to answer the simple question. Question is if the application is correct or not, if there is errors or not. It is very simple, but it is not typical approach today. Today, talking about the technology and programming, we are using unit test to because this way we are interacting with the program. So this way we need programmer, we need software developer to assess the result. It is in this case it's easy to assess that the program works as expected, because expectation is something abstract, there's a knowledge of the programmer, but we need programmer because the only programmer knows. For me, for example, I don't remember if this result is correct or not. It is just a result for me. It is a lot of text, but I can't say for sure that it is correct. There must be something wrong. So this way, it is rather assessing results of program behavior, but not answering the question if the program is correct or not. It is one way I'm using to test. To test behavior of the program. It's not very clever, you can see, because you expect knowledge from the someone that assess, that try answer the question if it is okay or not. Second approach I have in the unit test. In the unit test, I am checking where it is constructor injection unit test. In unit test, I am exactly trying to test the same. I'm calling alpha, bravo, Charlie, and delta. And next, I am checking consistency. I am checking that the behavior of the program is as expected. So I have a method that tries to check if all the methods has been called in a sequence. Go to definition. So here you can see that I am building a list of calls, list of messages, and trying to find in these messages if all the messages are correct and have appropriate value. This way, I can also use behavior of the program, but this way completely differs from the console application approach, where we must assess the result. We must assess the result manually, observing the screen, observing the user interface. Here, we must check that there are 4 messages in the list, and the first message contains alpha, second bravo, Charlie, and delta. So actually we are getting code. It is some magic. It is work home for you to understand all details of this approach. But it is, I think, very good example for you to follow in your program, to check not only what is returned by the methods, but it's uh, but it's testing behavior sequence of the operation. But the question for you now is, because here, let me go, for example, let me start from program. Here we are using peak definition. Here we are using dependency injection. And now it's a question for you to answer what the dependency injection is. What is dependency injection? Let me copy this. I don't provided you previous answers because I cannot harmonize questions and your answers. So now there is a question and I'm expecting your answer. There's some people writing. What is dependency injection? Actually, what is the difference between object programming about creation objects from the classes? Someone still writes. Let me open introduction. No, maybe let's go here to the alpha, go to definition. So here it is main class that it's under test. So we are testing behavior of this class. As you remember from the, okay, so I can, let me stop the discussion. Remember from the previous class that because we have to address a polymorphic problem, polymorphism in this case, it is completely different behavior that we expect from the console application and completely different from the unit test. Doesn't matter what it is. For us, the most important is that the behavior is completely different. So we must here use abstraction. You must here use abstraction and not here. Here, we are using abstraction to trace a message, to add the message to the queue, to write the message on the screen. But as you can see, now we have two different behaviors, right on the screen and right on the add to the tree. First problem refers to we cannot use here writing on the screen because it's library. So now we are in the business layer. Being in the business layer, it is impossible to refer to the presentation layer, where the right line actually is located, is defined, because in this case we have references from the console application to the library, from the library to the presentation layer. So console application is in the presentation layer. Actually, you have still different references. In this case, it's impossible to say which one is on the top. It is a question about the architecture. We'll go back to this question in a couple of minutes. But what condition? But to assess your program, you have answer or not to the question what the dependency injection is. I expected that it is, but the next question is what condition decide about necessity to use dependency injection? Because usually using the object-oriented programming, we are using object-oriented programming if we have polymorphic problem. It is not always true, but usually if we have polymorphic always, it is impossible to avoid object-oriented programming, because we need to use abstraction to reflect something that is common, and the next implement all the behaviors, different behaviors against this abstraction. It is exactly as we have here. So someone is writing, the question is, what condition decides about necessity to use dependency injection? Okay, so we're still waiting. Let me go back to program and show me one thing. That console trace source we are using here, go to definition. Actually, it uses console write line, but it is located in the application. It is located where we have user interface. So user interface belongs to the presentation layer. So we are not we are following we are following the rule that the presentation layer, that from the business layer it's impossible to get access to the presentation layer. Okay, let's stop the discussion. It breaks a while. Stop it. The problem is, the answer must be there is impossible to avoid. There is impossible. So if it's possible to use object-oriented programming, it's impossible to discuss to recognize this as dependency injection. If it's not possible to use directly, let me stress, directly object-oriented programming, it is impossible to. It is a place where we should talk about dependency injection. Our example is here. I am not going to answer the question precisely, but go to definition. And what I said refers exactly to this play: construction injection. Here it is impossible to use directly object-oriented programming. For you, homework and for task 1 is to prove that you understand this. Why? Can answer the question why it is impossible here to use directly object-oriented programming. What it means using directly object-oriented programming? It means that here it's possible to create object. So still I can use polymorphism, still I can use abstraction, but here it is a place where I could use that should be possible to use operation new, but it's impossible here. It's impossible here to use new. The question for you is why? And it's actually the answer to the next question, very important, that finish this discussion. It is if polymorphism is required to use the dependency injection. If applying dependency injection, the dependency injection is applicable only in the case where there is polymorphic problem. That we have problem with polymorphism, that we have implement two independent behaviors. The answer is yes or no. I've got one answer. Yes, all of you talking is that it's yes. It's the next topic. I think it's next topic. Let me stop the discussion. Let me stop the discussion. It is next topic for you as the homework, because the answer is no. It is not necessary to have polymorphic approach to use dependency injection. Maybe it's strange for you. Things. Try to imagine situation. Try to imagine. Try to imagine a scenario where you need to inject something from the outside. First, you must answer the question what the inside and outside means in this case. But no, okay, let's stop the discussion on the dependency injection. There's, I think, a few things for think as the homework. His answer is definitely no. No, we don't need polymorphism where we actually need to use dependency injection. Sometimes we need dependency injection, but we don't have polymorphic problem. Let's go to the task 1. To go to the task 1, let me open additional tool. It's not expected that you have this tool because it's very complicated. I think it's more complicated and larger than the Visual Studio, and all the diagrams you can find. I forgot about it. You can find task 1 no here. Task 1 diagram UML. It is new thing. Here is exactly the same diagram. The diagram exactly refers to the task 1. So let me provide for this a few comments. Let me provide for you a few comments. Still, I'm not going to answer all of the questions, all of the problems, because it's your homework and it's job for you. You must do something to make sure that you understand what's going on. Okay, there's something wrong with this. Let me open it another way. It should be added to my repository. I have additional repository for this things, but where is the repository? It's somewhere over here. It is here. Maybe it'd be easier to show you. Actually, you don't have access to this repository doesn't mean, but to make sure that you are following what I'm doing, I'm trying to open the same diagram, but in as a source, because there is a few functions I'm going to use. Actually, this UML diagram. Do you have? Let me answer if there is someone who knows what the UML is. Have you any lesson related to the UML? Can you answer on the chat or interrupt me? The program is opening still, so it is. Yes. Okay. So you should know what I'm talking about. It's good for me. It is simple. We don't have simplicity measurement, but in your task 1, you need to implement an algorithm that represent a selected process. Algorithm is something abstract. So first, you must implement this abstraction into the code and provide in the code appropriate functionality. So the functionality is provided by the data service. Here, this class is responsible to to provide any functionality from your program. It is dedicated functionality for your process. Next, two classes are represented to represent data in the process. Let's talk about this data repository. It is something that it's optional in some cases. So let's skip discussion about it for a while and discuss this one. The most important thing here is the most important thing is event. Because data context, it is a class that should aggregate all of the data. It should be single point where we are using to get access to all of the data. So the question first is how many access points we should have in the program. The answer is that we should have as many as processes we have represent. If we are going to represent one process, we need only one access point, because data context, it is the point, it is the instance during running, where we are talking with the computer, where we are executing our software on the computer. It is a single point where we are using to access the data related to this process. And in this process, we have events. We have events. For example, to explain what the event is, let me show something like this. The question is how long it takes to buy something in the online shop, remotely in the shop. How long it takes to buy? The answer is that that the time is actually 0. There is no need, because before buying we are selecting goods that we are going to buy. After selecting all the things we need, we are just pressing a key. I'm buying. After that, the state of all of the goods change to not available for the shop, because it is actually my goods. Of course, I must also pay. Sometimes without paying, all the goods will be returned to the shop, if you are talking about the shop. But even this something what happens, but doesn't take any time. It happens just in a second. We don't have time to do something, but we must report things like that. For example, buying. For example, booking something. It is event, and all of this event could be collected and aggregated by this data collection, data context, to make sure what is the state of the process. If you are borrowing a book from the library, the state of the books must change from the available to not available. And it is the event. So the event here actually is used to provide information what happens. So usually typical information provided by the event, it is a timestamp. A timestamp, because we need to know when the book was borrowed, when something was bought, something was withdrawn, something was done. Therefore, usually it is very important thing. I expect that in your program you will also use the timestamp as the place in the time, as the point in the time that something happens. Here we have representation of the user that take place in this process. buyers or library members, students, depending on the process, depending on the business process you select, you must select different users. But in this task, it is required that all the users are more or less equal. So we must provide similar information for the users. The most important thing it is to represent only selected members of selected users of the process. For example, buyers, not suppliers. For example, if we are talking about the shop. So the process must be simplified. Don't try. The most important thing here, it is to provide correct but simplified representation, implementation of the process. But here, the most important thing here, it is to keep information about the state of the process. For example, here you will need information if the book is borrowed or it is in the library, if it's available or not. You must change the state. To change the state, it is the problem that it must be in the collection. It must be, the task is about the collection, so it must be also aggregated by data context. Here we are aggregating all the things that we have in the process. For example, all the books, all the goods. But each book, we can provide common information for some books. For example, if it's a book of the author A, so we need to catalog what the author A means. It is common, it is metadata of the book. So we have many books, instances for the same author. Therefore, catalog is responsible to provide, for example, all the authors, if we are talking about the books, on description or all of the goods we have in the shop. But state represents actual instances of these entities that we have in the catalog. For example, here we have instance of the books, and here we have description of the book. Let me draw something on the screen. The question is here that for one event, that for one thing in the state, for example, for the book, we could have many events because the book is borrowed or is returned to the library. So it could change the state. So the problem we have here, it is data consistency. It means that actually, if the book is available or not, we can get analyzing all the events, selecting all the events that relates to this concrete book. We can answer the question if the book is available, because we know what kind of last event is. If the event is that the book has been borrowed, it means that the book is not available. If someone returned the book is now available. Therefore, from the event, we can guess what the state of the book is. But additional option is that here we can mark after the event, after borrowing, or after returning, we can change the state. We can add something here. We can add something here to make sure that opening the state, we can get if the book is available or not. I discussed this problem with one of the students, and I get an advice that in this case, where we are putting something inside the state, we are changing the state. The problem is that we are lasting memory. I answered, okay, in this way, we are lasting time, because we need to read all the events and to calculate from the events the state. Therefore, the problem is how to select appropriate solution, changing the state and having additional memory, and second, wasting the time. For you, it is homework for you to answer this question, because let me provide you two advices. First advice is that the answer must be yes or no, without any doubts. So we should not discuss. We should not try to find a measure if there is more important to have more memory or waste time or not. Second advice is that you must not talk about any kind of efficiency, about memory, and about the time. Forgot about these terms during this course. All the questions we must answer in the using engineering approach. So it must be just simple if something, do something. It must be yes or no answer, nothing else. And this is your homework, how to answer this question. How to solve the problem? Looking through this collection or just testing the memory? But the answer should not refer to time needed to look through these events and to memory that we need to represent this information. Is it clear? Any questions? It is your job. So during this, I have added to maybe I have added or not, but there are questions related to this problem. First, I've recalled one thing that I must add here. Remember that every requirements in the program are in the text because we really need it. It is impossible to solve the task without dependency injection. It is impossible to solve this task without knowledge about layering. Well, so let's go to the layering, because here.
May I have a question?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, because here is called a class model, yes, and do we need to implement it like that directly, that thing, or this event we are talking about is some abstract thing which can be different?
Everything must be concrete and must be implemented in your process. Depending on your process, even means something else. But in all the cases, it must be concrete event. For example, if you are talking about the shop, you are talking about buying something. If you are talking about the library,
so it's an abstraction, yes. It can be a method. This event can be implemented by just one method that changes the state. It don't need to be a one class or a physical, like some physical data stored in a database.
No. Event if it's information about something that happens. At least it should have timestamp.
Okay, so something like the list of orders is
an
event.
Yes, order processing the order. It could be recognized as the event. It could be recognized as the event. Okay. So if you, for example, if you have something, if you have a workshop or something, and you are getting the order, so the processing the order, actually the result of the order could be buying, selling something, sending something, transport something, or do something. But in any case, it could be first. What is important here? That for example, if you are talking about the library, we are talking about two things. One is borrowing and second is returning. It is two different things, different events, but still it is event. Therefore, here we have an example where the polymorphism must be used. Are you following me? Here, the event, for example, borrowing and returning, are two different events, but still it's event. But the data collection should provide information for all of the event, for example, in the library. Therefore, it should be collection or all of the events. So we must, that in this task, there is no set, but in this task, it must be possible to add the event to the collection, but different events. It is job for you. Let me go back to this guy. Is it clear for you now, more or less? If it's not, because talking about the UML is usually it's something abstract. Therefore, I think that we should next lesson we have to check that our environment is compliant, so that I can actually compile and use your program. I think that it is good place to provide in the program first your implementation of dependency injection to make sure that you are thinking about dependency injection in good direction. And second one is to provide some solutions that address the problem we have in the task, to make sure that to ask in the context of the program, not in the context of the UML. This UML is only a helper for you. But very important thing, it's data repository. I mentioned about it at the very beginning, but didn't provide a precise description, if it's required or not. I said that the problem here, we have below the data repository, data context is responsible to provide all the data for the process. So it could be recognized as something like singleton. And from this singleton, we should get all information about the process and recall all this what happens in the project, in the process. But the problem here, below the data context, it is consistency of this data, consistency. So the problem is, if the consistency is provided here or the consistency is provided here. Actually, because API, application program interface, over here, let me change this. API provided here should have embedded functionality that solves the problem with the consistency of the data. But I have my proposal is to delegate all of this functionality that is responsible for this data consistency to the data repository, and to provide the appropriate API here. But the question here is where we can use the layer, because the application must be layered. What is the data layer, and what is the business logic layer? It is the question, very important question. But first, we must answer the question what the layer is, I think. Any more questions? Okay, so let me switch. So, in the meantime, try to answer the question what the event is, based what the event is based on this diagram. Try to answer, what do What do you think? How to define event? What is the event here? Let's see if you understand. Let's go back to the software. I change the screen and open additional solution. Oh my God. If we have finished answering this question, I have for you next question to make sure you are following me. The question is, where the layer boundary can be located here. In the text, we are using two layers. Data layer, we are using data layer, we are still answering the question. Okay. Open the next Visual Studio. In the meantime, you are still writing, so I am waiting and trying to manage to open next adaptive programming solution. Adaptive solution, let me stress, to explain what the layer is, I am using different solution. Actually, it is solution calls adaptive programming for different curves, but we are going to use here only one thing. It is application architecture dependency and application architecture. We discussed about it during the previous program. So the situation here is like this: that we have business logic, and in business logic we have a few classes. Next we have a folder data, and we have the folder presentation. So comparing this software to the diagram we have for the picture we discussed during the previous lecture, it seems that it is something that's similar. And I'm going to use folders to implement layered architecture. But still, we need to answer the question what the layered application is. In the Visual Studio, there is very useful button here that creates a map. Maybe it's possible to create this map. It is complicated process, and sometimes there are problems. But now it works. It's good because I'm going to just a second. Still, it's created. Still, it's created, and I am looking possibility to make it larger. Just we must wait for a while. It's still working. So if you finished, for you it's next question. How to distinguish the boundary of the UML diagram? How to distinguish? Now we have what we need. And properties now. I am going to switch live. Okay, cannot find it for now, but make it larger. We have three namespaces. First, presentation, business logic, and data. It is answer the question how to implement layers. It is one possibility to use the layers, to implement the layers. So referring to the UML, for example, here we have one class, here we have a few classes, and in the next layer we have next classes. So the problem, the question is actually what the layer is. And during the laboratory, I advised you to use projects to distinguish appropriate layers. But here we can see, it is simple example. We can see that actually the layers, maybe I have a question about the layers. Where is the question about the layers? What the layers? Layers, yes. What is the layer? Control C. Let's stop the discussion and try to answer the question what the layer is. It should be simple. It should be a simple answer. It should be a simple answer. What the answer is in context of the program, not in context of the books, in context of something else. We must answer the question what the layer is in context of the program, in context of the concrete semantics and in concrete syntax. What the layer is, something someone is writing. So let's wait for a while. Here, let me show you that here it is an example where classes are defined to provide circular references. The class refers the class C. Go to definition. Go to definition. Where is show code? View content. Okay. Double clicking on it should answer the code. Yes. As you can see that in this class, we are referring in this service A, we are referring to service B, and so on. So this way we can define circular references. And what is important in this case? In this case, the most important thing is that it's impossible to create layers here. Therefore, if, for example, here we recognize this place as the layers, so the question is if the service B is upper layer or not, because the references are circular. So service B refers to service C. So this way, we can say that if service B is below, it is the layer, and it is below the service A. The service C is below the service B, but the service C refers to service A. So the question is if the service C is above the service A. This way, it's impossible actually to distinguish layers. So there are problems with the layers, Therefore, the layers must provide actually two attributes. And there's a question, next question for you, referring to the layers. It's summary of this. Can we use types defined in the layer data in the layer presentation? Can we use types defined in layer data in layer presentation? For example, here, let me remove our marks. Here we can say, okay, we have, here is one layer, second layer is data layer. But the question is if from this we can use this and still we have layers. Of course, no. Yes, you are right. Of course, no, because using this approach, stop discussion. Using this, we can actually break the layers. It's different. It is impossible to say if this layer is above this layer, because from this layer both are the same. We can access all of them. So let me conclude this part of discussion. First, the layer, it is set of types. It is set of types. We know what the type is. In a couple of minutes, we'll discuss what the type is in detail. But here, we know that in each language, we have a term that we call type. Layer is a set of types, and layer must follow special rules. The rule is that the layer must refer only to the layer below. It is actually the only rule that if we have this layer, if this is a layer, it could refer only to the layer below. If this is the layer, it refers to the layer below. It is impossible to cross the layers. If you are trying to cross the layers, it means that you are not implementing layered application. Therefore, the requirements for your task one is that everything must be actually in two layers. You must implement this layer as the layer data and business logic. So the question now is where this layer should be located in the case of, and how to distinguish layers, how to distinguish layers in the UML diagram. In UML diagram, the most simplest way to distinguish diagram, it is to use namespaces. Let me recall the discussion about the namespaces during the laboratory lesson. I said that the namespace is universal term. Actually, it is a set of identifiers. And this way, it is also set of identifiers. And from this, we can see that the boundary is here. It is business logic, data service that provides all the functionality. And below, there is data repository that provides functionality that supports access to the data. Data service provides this API here should provide functionality related to the process you have selected. Here you should expect all the operation that provides access to the data and keep the data consistent. There are actually two possibilities to check consistency, and for you, it is the question for your homework is to answer the question: how to make sure that the consistency of the data is preserved. Actually, there are two approaches, two possibilities. What we can do. In one possibility, we need this guy. It is just one class, but in your program, it is not necessary one class. Additionally, it is also not necessary to have one class in this case. Remember, this UML diagram is only a helper. It's a picture from the distance. So you must take care not to precisely follow this diagram. You must get from the diagram, it is abstract description. It is above your process because we have this diagram. Below this diagram is your algorithm of your process. Below this, your algorithm of your process will be your software, your program, your text that you must provide for assessment of task one. That's all that I'm going to talk about the task one. good place, good time to ask questions. We have couple of minutes. No, actually, we don't have time. But there is one thing that we must address for sure. There's no questions.
Okay, maybe I can have one.
Yes.
Because it's not even a question, maybe, but I read some article from Martin Fowler about the anemic domain model, and when I was writing some program, I find myself that I was using that anemic domain model, and generally the idea is that when we have the layered application, then we sometimes have models that describes for the database, and those models are just without any behavior itself. It's just a structure that encapsulates data, and there is no behavior in that. And when we put the old logic into some kind of a service layer in a separate component, so we have only those models with no behavior. So we not really do object-oriented programming, we do procedural programming using just a service which then uses just those objects which are not really the objects, they are just the bags of getters and setters.
Yes, it's actually it is not true, because first, your assumption is that the data do not provide any functionality. Is it true?
Yeah, that yes.
Can you
was
can
that is the idea of anemic domain model.
no. I don't agree with this assumption. I don't agree with this assumption. But let me describe where this idea comes from. This idea comes from because actually what you said, the model of the data is here. Here we don't have any functionality. It is just the data. Yes? Do you agree?
Yes.
Second, the question is what the functionality is. Because here I said that this stuff should provide only functionality related to the checking the consistency of the data, nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, some kind of functionality we have. So now let me explain where the example comes from. Actually, for the Polish students, we have task number 3 that refers to the databases. And we are using language integrated query to get access directly from the databases. And using the databases, we are using something like link to SQL. Link to SQL generates classes that represent database. It is something like a cache that it's that it's between the database and between the functionality implemented in the program. And precisely the terminology and everything, it's here. So the data context is auto-generated by the link to SQL. There are many different frameworks that also provide things like that. Still, the problem is with consistency of the data. And in this case, it is complicated. It is don't try to understand all the details, but in this approach, consistency is provided here in the data context. We found this guy, and in this case, actually, here there is a boundary. There is data layer. Here is data layer. here's data liar, because we don't need this guy. But I said about two possibilities how to make the data consistent. And this approach uses one of them. This one uses the second one. But we don't try to follow any ideas, precise ideas where the liars is located. For us, it's not the goal to precisely locate the liar. For us, the most important thing is to have liars, to make sure that we have liar, that we have types that refers only from liar that is above, refers only to the liars below. Is it clear?
Not quite. But maybe I will use an example, because I'm thinking about, let's say that we have the functionality to block some user. And we have a method that generally does block a user. So should it be into the user model, like a user class, or should it be separated in another user service which just blocks the given user? Because then we have this model with no functionality.
I think that, it is very difficult to discuss examples that are completely abstract, and it's because now we are trying to discuss about your imagination and my imagination. We have two different imagination about the different picture in our brains. Therefore, the better approach is to discuss against a concrete example. So if you provide concrete example, a concrete software, a concrete program, so we can answer the concrete. We can try to find concrete answer. Usually, the answer is yes or no, this way or this way. In the task one, so let's try to discuss only problem we have with task one. It is concrete example. Try to provide the code. Try to implement the liars that follows the definition, my definition. That the layer above refers only to the layer below, because if it's not true, we don't have layers at all. It's simple rule. It is simple rule. That's all. Second, try to provide this data context, as I said, without any embedded functionality. It should only provide access to the data. Simple point to access to the data. It is something that represents a database. Yes, you are right. It is something that actually it represents database. We can, for example, use any tool, including a link to SQL, to generate things like that, stuff like that. Therefore, there is no problem about discussing general models and things, because it was implemented in many frameworks. So try to provide correct solution for this. Try to provide correct definition of the event, of the user. It is representation of the user. What data you need to represent the user? Don't think about blocking something. It is not required in this. Don't complicate the task, because complicating the task, I'm pretty sure that we will not accomplish the task at all. It must provide simple description of the user. What the user for you means, for example.
It strongly depends on the software requirements.
Well, all the requirements you have in the task. Against these requirements, what the user is.
What the user is?
Try to find requirements in the task. Not try to use your imagination about what the user could be. Okay, what is the user in the operating system? What's the user in vCamp? What is the user in any other software, Azure or something like that? Try to imagine what the user is in case of this program. In case of this, yeah?
Like here we have only that the users is a collection of all actors relevant to the implemented business process.
Okay, what is the actor for you? Actor is something abstract, but in the program, what you are putting in this class? What information you are going to put in this class? What is enough to follow the task, to accomplish the task? Only name. That's all what is required. Not else. Not else. The only problem is that you must, the most important thing is this one. You must provide appropriate relationship between event and the user. And doesn't matter what the user is. The user could be just a name, just one field. That's all. There's no requirements that you should provide many different things. For example, rules of the users, group of the users. There's no requirements related to this. It's clear for you?
Yes, okay. No. Thanks.
So try to do as simple as possible. But don't forget about this arrow. It must be there. From the event, we must get to the user. The question is how to get all the events for selected user. For example, you have selected user that calls X something. How to get all the events for this user? Of course, and second, where this functionality should be provided. Because here, this tool is not very useful. Because here, we said that this class, UML class, don't try to think about class. It is not required that it must be just one class, but usually it is one class. It is enough to have one class. But the problem is if here you provide API that provides information for all these collections, you get user somewhere over here, and from the events, because context provides you access to the event, here you can ask context only to the events, and from the events you can select all the events that relates to this user. The question how to do it. Don't using. Remember, we are talking about the software, because so there's impossible to use, for example, like we have in the databases, keys, external keys, master keys, and things like this. Forget about it. We are talking about object-oriented programming. So we are talking about references and things like that. Okay, I think that we don't have time to discuss next topic. We have time is almost over. So I think that it's good time to finish this lesson. We'll go back to the topic that we have today on the agenda during the next lecture. The problem is that let me go to this to the agenda and remove all these drawings. For us, important thing is type definition. So assume that you know what is type concept and what the time is. Maybe I ask one more question. Oh, here's the question. What is type? What is type? Try to answer this question because this is quite important for us. And second most important, but we don't have time to answer, is what is generic? What is generic? But you must address this question. You must address this question as a homework. Maybe we'll have time during the lecture. Recall me during the laboratory lessons to get back to this topic, and maybe we will find time to discuss it before your deadline, because generics are heavily used as collections, are heavily used in the software, in the program, in your program, so you must be aware what the generic is. Have you answered? Still waiting for answer. What the type is? What it means? In a few simple words. Examples of types you can find. Today we don't have time to discuss it, but after opening the first solution, external data solution, there is folder data semantics, and in data semantics, for example, you can find folder generics, and in generics there is a lot of examples useful for you, but also we have type concept, and there's many classes that you can use. For example, here you can find an example what the singleton is. Singleton segment, but in the unit test there is also a very important thing. Here you can find answer to the question what's the generic X. Actually, I am using testing here not to make sure that the program works as expected, that it returns values as expected, that it makes sure that there are no exceptions, but I'm using test to explain different concepts of programming, including generics. But there is also type concept. Here you can, for example, find type concept, and in this type concept, there's many examples, but there is one example important. Let me find it. I'm not remember where it is exactly. Here you have partial, but it seems that singleton, that it's impossible to find it now. Trace source language. Yes, this one. Do you remember our discussion during the lecture, previous lecture? If the left side is equal to the right side, and we use, for example, a Roman representation of the numbers. Here you have an example how to define Roman, how to make sure that in program we can use similar things like on the screen, like during the lecture. It is definition of this Roman time. Okay, I think that's all for today. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm